back in worship with you all. Thank you for providing me and church staff with vacation. Again, it was really good to just kind of unplug for a little while, so thank you for that. I want to start this sermon out by telling you about a friend that I had. This is a friend of mine from Washington State, last call I was in, last church. And I got to know this guy, Jason, through kayaking. And I'm really glad that I did get to know him. And I don't know if any of you have a friend like Jason. So I'm going to describe him, and I want to see if anybody out there knows anybody like him. He is quite possibly the most positive, happy guy that I've ever met. He always seems to be smiling and always seems to be upbeat. Anybody know anybody like that? They've just got that eternal pep. I want to give you an example of how Jason looks at things, all right? Because I think it's easy to be positive when there are positive things going on. It is really hard to be positive when there are negative things going on. And I just want to show you a little different way that he looked at things. So it was super cold. It was a January winter day, so we passed on kayaking and we decided we're going to take a hike instead. So we drove 2 hours up into the mountain, and finally we get to the trailhead. And as soon as we get to the trailhead, my heart just dropped. I could see a couple other vehicles that were sitting in the parking lot, and everyone that was standing around them was wearing blaze orange. Jason, when does elk season start? He thought for a moment and said, I'm pretty sure it opened today. So there we are, standing at the edge of the forest with dark clothing on, not a scrap of anything bright. And Jason, of course, is smiling. And he says, well, the good news, Jim, is that it's modern rifle season. I said, what? How on earth is that good news, Jason? Well, he replied, I think it would really hurt to get shot with a bow and arrow. And with a laugh, he headed up the trail. And that's how Jason tends to look at the world. And I think that I'm a better person for having him as a friend because of that positive outlook, because of that joy, because of that happiness. And often those three things are contagious, right? When we're around somebody that feels that way, a lot of times we take on that feeling. And this made me think because I was thinking about Jesus, all right? And have you ever noticed that Jesus seems like a pretty positive guy? As I read the Bible, Jesus comes across as generally happy. In some ways, I find this kind of surprising because Jesus had a pretty rough life sometimes. I mean, Jesus was no stranger to poverty, to suffering, to discrimination, to violence. Sure, Jesus gets angry once or twice in our Gospels, and he gets sad one time when a good friend dies. But on the whole, Jesus seems to be overwhelmingly and unexpectedly happy. I mean, he's always talking people out of violence. He's telling people to calm down. He's eating with friends. He's drinking wine with people. He's taking naps, hanging out with kids. And Jesus' joy and happiness seems to be contagious as well. Jesus sees the good in people, and it literally changes people. Jesus sees the child of God in others so clearly that they begin to see it in themselves. When they hang out with Jesus, they realize that their entire life has changed. They realize that they are valuable, that they're wonderful, that they're loved by God. And you can see it throughout gospel stories, all right? So anybody know a guy named Peter, right? And Peter, when he first meets Jesus, he tries to make Jesus leave him because Peter doesn't think that he is good enough to be around Jesus. He says, leave me, Lord, because I am a sinful man. Peter, who keeps messing up, keeps failing Jesus, is always forgiven. He's always wanted, always given another chance. And suddenly, Peter starts believing that he is a child of God. And his entire life changes. You know, we see him in the book of Acts, preaching, healing, raising people from the dead. This is the guy that was so afraid that he couldn't even admit Jesus was his friend. His entire life changes. Number two, anybody remember Zacchaeus? A wee little man? A wee little man was he? He was a tax collector, right? He was hated and feared by all of his neighbors. He had no friends. He probably didn't care for himself all that much. Zacchaeus had such a low opinion of himself that he couldn't even bring himself to get up close to Jesus. He had to climb a tree to maybe get a glimpse of this Jesus character. But Jesus sees something else in Zacchaeus. Jesus doesn't see a traitor. Jesus doesn't see a cheater or a sinner. Jesus sees a child of God. And Jesus invites himself over for dinner. On that day, Zacchaeus sees himself as he truly is, and his life is forever changed. We could go through story after story. Mary Magdalene, the man born blind, the woman caught in adultery, and on and on. Jesus sees the good, the positive, and the beautiful in the people that he meets, even when they can't see it in themselves. How was Jesus able to do this? How was Jesus able to see our goodness despite all of our failings? How did he recognize each person's child of God so clearly that it changed lives? I wonder if this is what is going on at Jesus' baptism. What if, in order to see others as children of God, Jesus had to first know it for himself? At his baptism, Jesus learns that he is loved by God. Verse 17, and a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased." Jesus is beloved by our God. Pop quiz for you all. What has Jesus done? What has he accomplished? What has he achieved up until this point to deserve God's love? Yeah, he's just starting out, right? He hasn't done anything. He fled to Egypt and hid out for a bunch of years. And now he's back, and God loves him. Jesus is loved because God chooses to love him. And I wonder if this could be why Jesus is constantly trying to help people realize that they too are a beloved child of God. In order to begin his ministry, Jesus needed to know that he was completely loved by God. What if this declaration of love from the heavens allowed Jesus to see those people around him differently? What if each time Jesus passed somebody, he passed a person who was sick, or a person who was poor, a person who was mentally ill, Jesus heard these same words echoing in his head, "They are my child, they are my beloved." The good news for you, for me, for the entire world is that God's love didn't stop at a river 2,000 years ago. At our baptisms, God calls us all children of God and tells us all that we are beloved. We too are told that there is nothing that we can ever do to separate ourselves from God. It doesn't matter what our gender is, what our skin color is, what our sexual orientation is, what mistakes we've made, what mistakes we're gonna make. God loves you right now, and God will always love you. Baptism is about the forgiveness of sin, but it is also much more. As we look closely at Jesus' baptism, we learn that not only are we given forgiveness and grace and love, but we are also commissioned and called. Jesus was loved by God, and then he went out and shared that love with others. We too are called, like Jesus, to go out and live our baptisms by helping all the people we meet to realize that they too are beloved and named child of God. We are called to help other people realize who and what they already are. We don't need to try to prove God. We don't need to explain salvation. We don't need to convince someone that they need Jesus. Maybe we just need to tell them how we've experienced Jesus' love in our own lives. How God has loved us even when we were successful and also when we felt unsuccessful. Tell stories that you are proud of and maybe stories that we're not proud of. Tell stories about how God loved you even when you couldn't love yourself. I can remember teaching a high school Sunday school class at my last church. And we were talking about shame and about forgiveness and all those things. And I shared a story I'm not particularly proud of how I broke up with my first girlfriend in high school. And it was a very public, unkind manner. And as I shared this story, the room got really quiet. And the little teenage girl next to me gasped and said, "Pastor, you were like that?" "No," I said, "I am like that. We are constantly sinner and saint." I don't know about you all, but I've done a lot of good in my life, and I've also done a lot of things that I'm not proud of. The only constant through it all has been God's love. We are called by our baptisms this morning to see ourselves and those around us as children of God and beloved by our Creator. We are also challenged this morning by our baptism to tell others how God has loved us and how God has acted in our own lives. Will this be easy? Absolutely not. But unfortunately, Jesus never promises us easy or comfortable. However, Jesus always promises us unconditional love and forgiveness. Go in peace to share your good news with everyone you meet. Amen.